CEO Ronald Hickler from Creating the Difference. I want to talk to you a little bit about Coverstock and Coverstock technology as it's evolved over time. So I was able to go to some seminars over the last couple months, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what I learned from those seminars, especially when it talks about actual Coverstock evolution. We're going to start with some of the storm stuff because that was actually, I think, in my opinion, the best explanation of the Coverstocks that I was able to see. They actually used what's called an atomic force microscope to be able to show you some of their Coverstocks. They started with their urethane that they make, their power control. They showed R2S, SPEC, and NRG. I want to actually go a little bit deeper into those Coverstocks and talk a little bit about what that means and why it's kind of important, especially to you, the actual bowler. So we'll start by showing you an image that they showed of power control. So you can see that this Coverstock has some interesting properties to it. It's very flat, it's very planar. You don't see very many peaks and valleys. And you can tell that by the colors, right? So the darker the colors, the blues are low spots and the reds are high spots. And that's kind of what they showed in regard to the different types of Coverstocks that they make. Now, that being their urethane, you'd expect it to be fairly flat. Now, when you move to R2S, which is probably their most popular Coverstock by far, and it's been around obviously since about the 90s, the mid 90s, I think is when R2S actually debuted, you can see there's a lot more texture in this Coverstock. You can see there's more blues and more reds, obviously, and some yellows too. Nonetheless, all of that means more reaction, more texture is going to give you a much more aggressive Coverstock finish. You can see here this little chart that we've got here that kind of shows you the blue being some of the low spots and going all the way up to white, which is some of the high spots. And you can see that pretty aggressively there in that Coverstock. Now, we're going to go to NRG. NRG is more interesting because NRG is an older Coverstock for them, but obviously one of their most aggressive Coverstocks, and you can kind of see why here. You can see lots and lots of red, little bits of white, which means it's super, super high. And then obviously some of the darker colors as well, showing that they're low. But NRG obviously is a very, very aggressive Coverstock. And you can see that displayed here. And then last but not least, we'll switch gears and go over to SPEC. SPEC's kind of interesting because SPEC is unique in the form that it still has a lot of texture. It's got more texture than R2S, right? Doesn't have as much texture as NRG. But one of the interesting things that they talked about specifically with SPEC is that SPEC has a slower oil absorption rate, and we'll dive into oil absorption at a much, much different time. But you can see here the SPEC Coverstock, the low texture versus the high texture, and that ultimately means you're going to get a Coverstock that has evolved over time. We're going to kind of change gears a little bit. I'm going to show you, there's the R2S again. You can see that compared once again to SPEC, which shows you that there has been some progression made over time with Coverstocks, but I wanted to show you this one here at the bottom. This happens to be actually the Brunswick Phantom Coverstock. Brunswick actually showed that at their presentation, which I thought was kind of interesting. Same kind of concept, right? Some high points, some low points. These lines here are actually sanding lines that were in the Coverstock, that were in the ball, right? So those are actual sanding lines. Whenever they made the AFM image, you could actually still see the sanding lines, but nonetheless, there is still texture regardless of the sanding lines that are in the bowling ball. Now we're going to change gears again one more time. I'm going to show you this video. This is kind of interesting. This was actually coming from EBI. They said that they have the ability to add chemical additives to reduce or increase texture in the Coverstock. Now I don't think it's this dramatic, but this nonetheless is a depiction that they showed to be able to show you that they now have the ability to add additives. The additives are the little, looks like snowflakes going into the cover. And then you can see how it has this impact on the Coverstock. I know from bowling ball development that that's not the way the actual process works, but nonetheless, this is a dramatization to be able to show you what can be done. And this one is the opposite, right? So in this case, the additives increase the texture in the Coverstock. Now you say, okay, Ron, that's great, but what does that mean to me, the bowler? Well, I think what it means is that manufacturers are beginning to look at other ways to increase or decrease the chemical component makeup of the bowling ball, not necessarily the surface. So because of that, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see more Coverstocks come out in the future that are going to be more aggressive or less aggressive, even if they are at the similar type surfaces. So I think that this is going to be a good time for bowling. I think it's going to be a very powerful time for bowling because you're going to begin to see more Coverstocks that produce more difference than in the past, especially because manufacturers are kind of forced to go down this path. One of the biggest things that manufacturers would use to be able to increase hook was oil absorption, and that oil absorption is going to be not regulated, but it's going to be kind of controlled a little bit more restrictive as we get to 2020 when an actual oil absorption rule comes into effect, which means if that no longer is your ticket to immediately create more hook, you got to look for other ways. And I think Coverstock advancements are coming as a result of that. And like I said, I mean, you're already kind of seeing that a little bit, especially I like kind of what I'm hearing from different manufacturers, especially when it comes to looking at some of the AFM atomic force microscope images that they're sharing with the general public. So I'm a big fan of where we're headed with this whole thing. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think as an industry, we're going to see some newer type cover stocks that actually do some different things coming here in the near future. As always, if you have more questions or need more information, make sure you check us out at ctdbowling.com. Ronald Hicklin, CEO from Creating a Difference. Have a great day.